Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm CEO at the Churchill Club. Really appreciate you joining us for this. And we also thank Ford Greenfield Labs for hosting us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Let's give them a hand. The hashtag tonight is Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter information as well as full speaker bios in your programs. In our work as an independent platform for business and technology thought leadership, we try to illuminate key trends before they are widely discussed, and we try to hone in on possible opportunities for innovation, economic growth, and social good, at least two of those things in every program. And we approach these conversations with a sense of exploration and almost always also a sense of optimism in terms of what these technologies could potentially represent to better our lives and our world. And in tonight's program, called Social Media and Social Wellbeing, Can We Strike a Balance?, we are gazing in a somewhat different direction. A recent statistic shows that adults in the U.S. spent nearly 6 hours per day on digital media last year. And there is growing concern about non-trivial side effects that people are seeing, from distracted driving to inhibited focus to even depression. So first of all, what is keeping people so glued? And going forward, how can we think about creating better balance between the potential downsides and the undeniable myriad positive aspects of these services? So here to weigh in, tonight's speakers, Vivek Wadhwa and Alex Salkever, have done heavy research into this, and they have co-written a book entitled Your Happiness Was Hacked. Alison van Diggelen of Fresh Dialogues and the BBC is here to lead them in conversation. Let's bring them up and welcome them now.
With this disease.
But you're using it in the proper context.
Right. So, putting it down, putting it away.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome. Tonight we're going to discuss a timely and worsening problem, our tech addiction. What is our addiction to technology? What is the impact on our health, on our relationships, on our community, on our businesses, and our democracy? Heavy topic. The context of this is key. Tech companies are locked in a race for our time and our attention, and we are losing out as is. To give this some context, consider this. Time is our ultimate scarcity. Isaac Newton can give us more electricity, but he can't give us more than 24 hours in a day. So we're constantly having to sacrifice alternative activities to get the one that pleases us most. That was Paul Samuelson. He was the first American to win the Nobel Prize for Economics. And he's an expert on opportunity cost and scarcity, a very key topic relating to tonight's conversation. So how did we get here, and how can we regain control of our lives? Vivek and Alex, you guys are experts. You've done a deep dive in this, and we're going to explore what we can do about it, how we got here, because that's a key part in escaping from this mess that we're in. So how are we manipulated, and how can we get out of this? We're going to talk for about 45 minutes up here, and then we're going to open the floor to your insights and your questions. So I read Your Happiness is Hacked. Excellent book. Highly recommend it. And I want to start with you, Alex. You both had near-death experiences. And Alex, can you share your near-death experience and the contribution that your tech addiction had to that?
Yeah, I will. But I also wanted to interject one thing very quickly, which is both Vivek and I actually love technology. We think it's essential. We are not talking about taking your cell phone and throwing it into the ocean, turning off your email.
Take it back, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's not the conversation necessarily, but we want people to have a more responsible or a more conscious view of it. And it is out of control in a lot of ways. In my particular case, I was coming home from a family vacation in Mendocino, and I was driving down Highway 1, and there was sort of a dispute among the executive team at a company I was working at, and I was texting while I was on a very windy portion of highway, and I was thinking, okay, I knew I shouldn't do this. In the back of my brain is saying, don't do this. But every time you hear the little text, sort of the notification come, you feel this strong urge to pick up your phone and look. And so when the road would straighten, I'd pick up the phone and look and try to scratch something out. And one of the times when I had the phone up, a little alarm bell went off in my head. I looked up, and I realized that I had almost run 4 cyclists off the road, pushing them into the Pacific Ocean, which would have been probably about a 300-foot fall off a cliff. So it would have ended their lives, probably would have forever changed mine and that of my children. And in retrospect, even at that moment, in my mind, I was thinking, is this worth this? Why am I doing this? Will I remember this in even a month? And that was my moment. And I almost drove myself off the cliff, too, of course.
A cautionary tale there. Vivek, can you share yours?
Well, this goes back to Chichen Itza and a cruise I took to Mexico with my family, disconnected from the internet, getting very antsy about not being connected, wondering what's going on. The internet wasn't working on the cruise ship. And I was indestructible in those days. I was the CEO of a tech company, about to go public, billion-dollar valuations and all of that stuff. And started getting chest pains, back pains, sweating, not understanding what it was. I ignored it. And then on the cruise, started feeling nauseous. I ignored it. Then on the flight back, getting electricity going through my arms. And my wife says, Vivek, you're not going to ignore this anymore. We're taking it right to the doctor. So as soon as we landed in Chapel Hill, in Raleigh, Durham, I lived in Chapel Hill, we went to the UNC hospital.
And what did you tell your wife you wanted to do when you landed instead of go to the hospital? Check your email.
And my wake-up call was that the doctor said, if he hadn't checked in the next couple of hours, he wouldn't have checked out. And I had actually damaged my heart. I took permanent damage. This is why I stopped being a tech CEO and became an academic instead. It was my life-changing event. And, in a strange way, it's the best thing that could have happened to me. Because I stopped focusing on the rat race that many of us are part of, building the billion-dollar company. That was literally there. Robbie Stevens was talking about taking us public. I owned 44% of the company. They were talking about going out at a valuation of $1 billion. They thought it would get to $3 billion. So there I was counting my billions. And a few months later, I'm sitting in critical care. And the doctors didn't tell me that I may not make it. They told my wife that. They didn't want to get me more stressed out. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, what would I have been known for? Making $1 billion? Who would have cared? What have I done with my life? What have I achieved in this, in this life?
Yeah,
so that was,
that was back to, again, that opportunity cost thing. So let's dig down.
And by the way, that's something all of you should be thinking about as well. That it isn't about this rat race. It's really about, trying to make an impact and do good for the world while you have an opportunity to do it. It's more relevant for the people in this room because you're part of the rat race in Silicon Valley than it is for most people that I meet, and even for the people we wrote the book for.
So Alex, let's drill down. You both did a lot of research for this book. What are the impacts beyond general health, life and death? What are the impacts on our brains specifically of too much tech?
So there's a whole variety of impacts, and you can't really say, so there's the direct and then the secondary and tertiary. Direct impacts are that the way applications have been designed, particularly social applications, but a lot of work applications too, things like Slack or email. And I wouldn't say the design is totally intentional always, but often it is in the case of Facebook or Twitter. And understandably, they were trying to get us to pay attention. It's designed almost like slot machines in a casino. It's designed to really grab us, make us want to come back and check it all the time, and even feel like something's missing when we're not doing it. The core part of it is something that It goes back to behavioralism, which was researched by B.J. Skinner, famous psychologist, the Skinner box, called Intermittent Variable Rewards. Some of you have probably read about some of this. And also B.J. Fogg, a researcher at Stanford, who also pioneered behavioral design, wrote about some of this. Tristan Harris at Google, who was a design ethicist, wrote about this. But basically the idea is rats in a cage, when you give them food pellets all the time, they become bored and they only will hit the lever when they're actually hungry. But if it's a game and they hit the lever and the pellet comes out only some of the time, then they keep hitting the lever over and over again. And that's the same with social media and a lot of other things, such as email, if you think about it.
Right, so we're getting a dopamine hit every time we get a like on.
And that's just one of the psychological biases, the evolutionary weaknesses that these systems exploit. And it's a balance, too, because, I mean, of course, if you're in the business of creating a product or service, you want people to use it. So at some level, it has to be attractive and interesting. But if it crosses this threshold where it's no longer healthy for people, where the user becomes almost the product, which is, I'm sure, a trope that you've all heard, then you really have to start thinking, is this a proper way to design a business? Is this good for the long term of the users, or even for the business itself?
Right. And Vivek, can you explain about the impact of too much tech, or tech addiction, on our communities? This whole idea about compassion collapse. We're getting less empathetic and more in our silos and more divided.
Also, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Social media was supposed to bring us together. For the first time ever, almost every person on this planet is going to be connected. In the next 3, 4, 5 years, everyone in the world, the poorest of the poor, will have a smartphone and internet connectivity. And they will be able to learn from each other. They'll be able to communicate from each other. They'll be able to solve problems. The idea was that children would get above the biases of their parents. That, when we were young, the information we received was from our teachers, our preachers, and our friends. That's how we learned everything. The idea was that children would now be able to learn from other children all over the world. And we'll be able to share knowledge. We'll be able to achieve a level of enlightenment as a race which was unimaginable even a decade ago. But something went wrong here. What went wrong here was that the tech companies that made all of this possible decided that they could make a lot more money by selling the information they were gathering about us, by allowing others to micro-target us, to sell ads to us. It wasn't any evil intent. The people, in tech world really mean good. They're trying to save the world. They want to uplift humanity. However, the mechanisms that they put into place, and largely because of the ignorance of the people we have here, ended up being used for malicious purposes. We've heard about Cambridge Analytica, but that's the tip of the iceberg. If you were in Burma, you'd be talking about the Rohingya refugees. In Bangladesh, you have riots being started through social media. So what happened here was that we completely went off track. That the technologies that should have uplifted are now being used to create filter bubbles. So we only hear what we want to hear, really. I mean, we decide what information we want, and we hang out with people who share our views. And then, on top of that, the technologies we're using decide what information we're interested in based on what we've looked at before. So we're now really it's becoming groupthink. It's becoming regionalized, compartmentalized. We're being programmed in the wrong ways. It's sort of all gone off track. And this is really what my big worry is.
And why you wrote the book.
And why we wrote the book,
So
yeah.
Alex, can you drill down on the business side of things, how this is affecting the workplace? Constant interruptions, etc. How is our tech addiction impacting us at work and businesses in general?
So this is my feeling, and this type of belief is hard to document objectively. At the same time, you are seeing more and more people come out with views around this. That in the past, it was much easier for us in the workplace to dedicate large blocks of time to important tasks, to focus. And because today, so much technology is interruptive or also quasi-addictive. I mean, email, you feel like, I'll just check it every hour. Then you have to check it again, or then your boss emails you and you feel like you have to reply immediately. And before you know it, the amount of time in your day that you have to work on dedicated tasks in an uninterrupted fashion starts to decrease and decrease to the point where your whole day is fragmented into 5-minute chunks, 10-minute chunks. And along the way, at the same time, social media creates the same type of interactions. So really, Slack is not all that different from WhatsApp or Facebook because it's constant notifications. It's always asking you to come back and check it. And even if you do your best to stay away from it, in the workplace you're often forced to deal with it. You can't necessarily put on Do Not Disturb. Other types of technologies like calendaring, for example, it used to be very difficult to schedule a meeting. There was a high cost. Now you have people, probably some of you in your organizations, that maybe schedule a lot of meetings. And you're not quite sure what they're all for, but you have to go to them. And so when you add all of these things together, what you end up is a diminished time of the day to do the most important things for your work, which is to do things.
And productivity is being impacted, of course. Yeah.
Well, and that's something that actually, again, there hasn't been an objective correlation, but some economists are now starting to think that the slowdown in what's called total factor productivity, which basically started in the mid-2000s, I think, after the internet bubble, may be related to information overload or the reduction of focus time.
Right. And you both, you cite Tristan Harris, who was a former Googler. He was an ethicist at Google, and he now leads Time Well Spent. And he has some advice. Can you kind of encapsulate some of the advice, Vivek, that he offers? Or Alex? Would you like to?
He has a lot of advice that's very simple, but at the same time super useful. The first one, which basically is that if you're not paying for something, then think of what you're doing there, because realize you are the product. You're being sold. So make sure you frame your mind that way. Also, when you are doing something like social media, try to establish an objective view of how much time you're actually spending. People tend to underestimate by 40, 50, 60% how much time they're spending on these things. And that's a simple cognitive bias. And you've all probably experienced something like this, where you've gone down the YouTube rabbit hole, or you started checking Twitter and something came up in your feed that was interesting, and you clicked on it, and then it led to someone else's feed, and you followed them, and you saw different things. And next thing you know is 20 minutes later, in those 20 minutes, they add up over time. So his view is be a lot more conscious about how much time you're spending. Also, a very simple rule that he says people should apply is ask yourself after you've spent some activity with this, does it make you feel happier or unhappy? Because if it makes you feel incredibly happy, this is a great way to spend your time. But if it was something where you ended up doing something, an activity for a long time that maybe wasn't something you wanted to do, but you just kind of kept doing it, kept pushing the lever, then stop and think, this makes me unhappy.
Yes. And you actually coin a new kind of law. You cite a law called Parkinson's Law. We all know this one. Work expands to fill the time available. So you tell us about your new law for tech, the law of application sprawl, and what the implications of that are.
So basically, any corporation given the freedom to use new technologies will probably adopt as many of them as it can possibly fill in the day. So you will run into situations where, and this is totally common, where people on teams will be expected to use 15, 20, 30 different technology tools, whereas even 7 or 8 are so much that it can suck up so much of your time just in what's called switching costs, switching between the different tools, or in trying to remember. Box versus Google Drive, how much memory can I put here? Where can I transfer it? What's the password? Who has the password? And so this sprawl tends to suck up a whole lot more of our time. But we allow it to happen because it's easier for that minute to say, I'll just use a new application.
And Vivek, you've coined this expression, the 5 commandments, a way of getting hold of your tech addiction. Can you talk about what some of these commandments are?
Well, it's very simple. You should look at every technology and say, do I really need to use it or not? Will it make me happy or unhappy? Will it really do anything good for me or for the world if I use it? It's really that simple. Look at everything. Do you really need to have Twitter on your phone? Could you just check Twitter when you get into your laptop? Do you really need to be be using Slack notifications? Could you do better without them? Take every single technology and look at it objectively, saying, would my life be better without it? It's really that simple. And if the answer is no, it won't be better without it, then put it away. Your lives will go on fine without those technologies. The central message over here is that technology isn't good or evil. It's how you use it which makes it good or bad. And it's really up to us to maintain that balance. We can't run away from technology. We're dependent on it, and we're nothing without it. However, if you use it in excess, that's when the problem is. Or since we're in Silicon Valley, it's like marijuana. You can try it out every now and then, but if you go too far with it, you're doomed.
And I'll add one thing here, too, just to build on what Vivek is saying. Sometimes we don't even realize that our excessive use actually hurts people around us. Well, for example, in an obvious way, if you run them off the road. But how many of you have been to a playground and seen a child, or been somewhere and seen a child saying, "Mom, Mom," or "Dad, Dad," and they're looking at the phone?
Look at this, my friend over here. On the phone. This is what the problem is, that all of us are checking our phones just in case there's an important message, or is there a tweet that we would have missed. All of us are guilty of it. I mean, all of us have these devices in front of us. There are no exceptions here.
Yeah, and we are guilty of it too.
But I think I would all agree that probably of all, members of the community is our kids. Yes. Our kids are losing out the most. Can you kind of dig into that and some of the research you found on how it's affecting family life and kids in particular?
Well, in the good old days, we would go out and play. You ride the bicycle, no stress. It was a carefree, easy life. Now they have their smartphones with them. They're worried about getting messages not only from their friends, but from their parents. And there's always stress to come home. And then when they come home, Mom and Dad are worried that it took them too long to come home. What if MS-13, the gang that Donald Trump has been popularizing, what if they happen to have their members on the way home and they kidnap their children? I mean, all these fears that are being propagated by social media. So this is what's changed. That it's no longer the simplicity of just having a good time and coming home and playing and not having anything to worry about. That's all gone.
So let's dive into some recent trends. You write, the electric cattle prod of nasty public comeuppances has awakened the sleeping giants of Silicon Valley from their slumber and naivety. Can you expand on what you meant by that?
I think we put it into the context of what we've seen over the last 6 months. You've got to realize that this book was written a year ago, right? Before all of the revelations about Cambridge Analytica. When we wrote it, it wasn't clear that there would be outrage that we were saying these things. People could have called us a bunch of idiots who have no idea what they're talking about. 6 or 9 months ago, we would not have accepted that Facebook was nothing but good. That Google was still, we can do, the motto was still, we can do no evil. They've taken it off their website. But the fact is that a few months ago, we wouldn't have accepted the fact that we here in Silicon Valley could be doing all this evil. Now, I don't think that anyone is in denial about that. This has changed. So forget the book. Just the fact that we've exposed the dangers of social media, it's accepted now that there's something wrong here. So this book, as it turns out, couldn't be more timely. Because we wrote about all of the things that have now happened in the last 6 months. And we also went one step further, and rather than just complaining about it, we said, okay, here's what we do about it. So we looked into what we do as human beings, as parents. We looked into what we do as business executives. In other words, what should companies do? We looked into it, what should governments do? So this book was originally Alex's idea. I mean, I give him a lot of credit for this. But the fact is that it just happened that we had hit on the right theme well before it happened.
Let's start with governments. What do you feel governments should be doing in this context? Well,
this is where we disagree. I mean, my friend over here has been...
Well, tell us what you think first, Vivek, and then we'll have Alex counter.
I think that we have to do what we did with the cigarette companies. That the cigarette companies were trying to make us addicted. Here, as Alex said, they looked at Skinner's research. So you had Professor Fogg from Stanford who built on top of that. And then you had a whole cult of people who learned from Fogg and started teaching it to all the execs of these tech companies, whether it be Slack, whether it be Instagram. All of these companies gain the same insights from the work of B.F. Skinner from the 1940s.
But what should the government do?
But the thing is that the trick here is to cause an addiction. It's exactly what the cigarette industry wants to do. That's exactly what the alcohol industry wants to do. That's exactly what the casino industry wants to do. It's about creating addiction. So what do we do when you have addiction such as that? You regulate. Government has a role. Silicon Valley, we hate government, but there is a role for government to protect society from monopolies, from excesses, from abuse, from all of these tendencies which could destroy society. We have now a situation in which our tech industry is out of control. It needs to be reined in. Even Facebook, Zuckerberg has now admitted we need regulations, but the fact is that he really doesn't want regulations. We need regulations because regulations also will do a good over here. That it's like providing the railroad tracks. They create standards to which everyone must adhere.
What specific regulations and standards would you like to see?
For example,
you know more about this than most of us.
Yeah, I don't want my data being shared with anyone. I believe we have a constitutional right to own our own data. I don't want Facebook monetizing it without telling me exactly what they're doing and getting my
so an opt-in, so like GDPR, what they're doing in Europe.
I think the Europeans have been very nice about this. I would go to another extreme, saying we own our own data. If you lose our data, if Equifax is hacked, then I'm going to sue Equifax for all the damages done to me. Equifax should have gone bankrupt for allowing our data to be hacked. If the rules indeed were that every tech company is liable for the data that they have, they would be very, very careful about storing it on their servers. They would try to go to Fort Knox and lock it up over there because they knew that if their data was hacked, they'd be out of business. Right now, what do? Oh, sorry, we just had a breach. We'll give you a free month of Equifax of credit reporting, and then everything goes back to normal.
But how do we rein in Facebook in particular?
In particular, you have very tight regulations about what they can do with our data, that you stipulate that they must get consent from every user on how it's used. They must disclose every ad. Every ad that's up there, I want to know who purchased this thing. They must give us a dashboard. This is one of the recommendations that we created in the book, that they must allow us to select what views we want. I mean, why do we have to have Facebook order our friends' postings in the way that Facebook thinks we want to see them? We should be able to have multiple perspectives, multiple views. So we need to have all of these options, and the tech industry must. Simplest thing over here is this should be done before the next elections. Is that every ad must be labeled clearly as a political ad,
I think Facebook is starting to do that.
I don't think they're trying to do anything. They're dancing around it all, and they're pretending that they're complying with regulations when in fact they're going to be even mining more data. They're watching everything we do here. I mean, you make the mistake of installing Facebook or Messenger on your phone, and you're given Mark Zuckerberg the keys to the kingdom. He's going to watch everything you're doing and keep track of everything you do. To be fair,
they have announced that they're intending to do that, to make ads transparent.
This is the PR. They've got good PR people who are putting out complete nonsense and deluding people. I want the ability to sue these companies. Those are the type of regulations I like to see. My friend over here is more modest, and that's why the book is more moderate than I am, because there was a balance.
Okay, Alex, why is government regulation not the answer? And what would you say is the answer?
Well, some of what Vivek says I agree with. I think the policy of opt-in is a good idea, and us being able to see our data, because it is really our data, is a good idea. But I really see this more as a failure of imagination by those companies that view the attention economy and free ads as the only way to make money. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad way to make money, but there are other things that you can do that are less toxic.
You recently wrote about this, about Facebook and how they can change their business model. Give us a few tips of how you see them changing things so that we're not the product as much.
So I think a simple way, which they're actually now starting to experiment with, is to allow us to pay for Facebook and opt out of all data collection, opt out of any ads, and it just becomes a service we use. And they're starting to do that with some groups. It's a subscription service, but because it would be subscription, that would mean they would be closely aligned with our interests. We're the customer, we're paying them. It's not a question of, they have to sell as many ads as possible, and that means us just sitting there and clicking. I think you also look over the arc of Silicon Valley, and one of the businesses that's done a remarkable job of keeping their interests aligned with their customers' interests is Apple. And Apple goes quite a ways back, whereas we can look at Facebook, look at Google, and all of them do not have the kind of legs or longevity that Apple has. So, I mean, I think that over the long term, it's a healthier business model to treat your customers as something that you value instead of as a commodity to sell against. And I just hope that more companies will wake up to this and try to structure things this way. Now, it's a harder bar because a lot of people may abandon Facebook. But that's a pretty interesting signal, isn't it, that they won't pay for it? I mean, if they won't pay for it, that tells you something. It means it's not worth that much.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. You, in your book, you describe a vision of a more humane technology environment. Can you itemize some of the key facets of that future, that brighter future?
So one of it we did touch on already, which is a lot more opt-in, where you're being given explicit choices to what your environment looks like. You can decide what's on your menus, perhaps. You can also have more control over notifications. For example, Apple's pretty good at a lot of things. One thing they're not good at is helping us filter notifications, so that we have to go in and manage each one. There should be a button on the phone that you push it and all notifications go off. Now, it's somewhat there with Do Not Disturb, but that's also really clunky because you may want some notifications to go in, others to go out.
Yes, it's a multi-step process.
Right.
Yes.
Another example is control over where our data is traveling to advertisers, so that we know what's happening to us. We know when people are selling our data. A third one really is thinking about, or hopefully having the companies think, how much time is this person using this? How are they using it? And giving us a really transparent view of it. I mean, does Facebook have a feature that says you've been on Facebook 35 hours this week or something like that? No, we have to go and dig for that. Whereas I would like to know that just as I want to know how much time I'm on my cell phone or how much time I'm doing other things.
And beyond what companies and government can do, what is our role, as consumers? The self-responsibility aspect of it.
I mean, as Nancy Reagan would say, just say no.
Do you have some steps? Because it's easy to flippantly say, just say no, because we're all being manipulated by people that know better how to addict us. So what are some of the steps? Can you break that down, saying no?
Sure. So, and these are, it's not easy to do this. We all know that changing habits is hard. You've probably read Charles Duhigg's book and some other things. But the first step is to understand what your habits actually are and how much time you're spending. So I did a little exercise where I took a pen and paper, I clocked an hour, and I wrote down my activities for the hour, just to see what I was actually doing. And I was kind of shocked to realize how much I flipped around, all the different things I was doing, what I was checking, and creating a visual picture of what you're actually doing, or a list, really helps you understand it better and helps you think about, okay, how do I control this? Part of it is also engineering your environment better. So, for example, rather than scrolling back and forth on your phone, your smartphone, looking for an app, you just search. Because searching, you'll find it immediately. Scrolling back and forth, you'll see 7 apps that have little red dots, which means you might need to check them because either there's a message or an update. So just being very conscious of how you can minimize these other things that will take your time. But ultimately, which is similar to what Vivek is saying, just ask yourself this very simple question, which is, does this app or does this application, this technology usage make me feel happy or sad? And that's not necessarily blanket. It's like, either Facebook makes me sad or not. It could be Facebook on your laptop makes perfect sense because you use it in a way where you're sharing pictures with your parents or your friends, whereas Facebook on your phone is kind of compulsive. So uninstall Facebook on your phone. But think consciously about the way you create your environment, the things that you're using, and how you can use that to maximize your happiness.
Well, talking about our environment, one of the things we probably all know, but I would love you to elaborate on, is our smartphones have no place in the bedroom. That's what the experts say,
yes.
Especially the sleep experts. Yes. So talk about that and whether you actually obey that commandment.
I do. My wife does not, so that can be a source of conflict. And her rationale, which is a good one, is that her 92-year-old mother might call or something like that.
So when did you take your phone out of the bedroom, and how did you get to that point?
So I haven't had my phone in my bedroom probably for 2 or 3 years now. I got to that point when I realized in one of my older jobs, there was somebody on the executive team that would send out emails in the middle of the night, and I would wake up and my phone would be there, and I would check it just because into my head would pop this thought, oh, they wrote, I should probably see it and either respond, or at least then maybe I'll think about it in my sleep. And the reality would be, then I would see, oh, my China person emailed me too, I should probably reply to her so I can catch her in the business day. And the next thing
then you're on the treadmill again.
Yeah, and then I was 15 minutes in the emails, I shut it down, but I had been exposed to the blue light, which keeps you up and messes up your melatonin production, and also my brain was working. So that, about 2 years ago, I decided, okay, phone goes off around 9 p.m., I put it in a drawer, and that's that. And after I started doing that, I started noticing that I was sleeping a lot more, I was feeling more rested, and I started doing a bunch more research around this as well, and now there's been more research and more books coming out that America is getting more and more sleep deprived. It's pretty much a consensus. Something like 30% of the population gets less than 7 hours sleep a night. And a lot of neurologists and sleep experts think that once you drop below 7, it starts to really impair your performance. Once you drop below 6, you're borderline dangerous in a lot of activities. And we as Americans just don't understand that, or don't want to think that. The saying is, I'll sleep when I'm dead. At least a lot of people in Silicon Valley say that. Well, you might get that wish sooner than you realize. And not just because it makes you unhealthy, but also, guess what? Suicide's been trending up. Depression's been trending up. Can you make a direct correlation? Of course not. There's many things in that. At the same time, sleep is essential, so take it out of the bedroom.
Yeah, I have read research from at Berkeley. They have a sleep center, and Professor Walker there, they've done this research on sleep deprivation is like arriving drunk at work. I mean, it's that big of an impact on your performance and your productivity. So,
and by the way, it ties into inability to design your environment to resist other types of addictive behaviors, because when you're sleep deprived, you lose your executive function and your ability to really try to structure.
And that goes back to the crux of what we're talking about today with tech addiction and using tech for good. If we're not getting the sleep, then we're not making good decisions, and we're ignoring the opportunity cost of our time, frittering our time away on useless social media. So Vivek, tell us about your do you have your phone in the bedroom, and if so, why or why not?
I need it because it's my alarm clock. It's my clock.
But you put it in airplane mode, right?
Yeah, but I put it into do not disturb mode. Now the problem was I had WhatsApp on this, and WhatsApp doesn't respect do not disturb mode. So I deleted WhatsApp and I told people I'm never going to use it now. So I don't. So I had to shoot WhatsApp because of that. But that is the only way I could manage it. So it goes on do not disturb at 9 o'clock. And then in the morning when I wake up, I check email after that, but only after I'm wide awake. That simple.
So both of you have boundaries. That's great to hear. Great to hear. So one other aspect that happened just in the last week was the World Health Organization recently classified gaming as a form of addiction. Mm-hmm. Talk about that, and what else could be done at that level, at the United Nations level, to help us with our tech addiction. What else would you like to see happen?
We need to recognize that tech itself is an addiction. It's not only, we've been focusing on phones and social media, it's also TV. The fact that Netflix has Netflix, YouTube have the system gamed against us.
With the autoplay?
Yeah, autoplay. And also, even if they turn autoplay off, every episode of every series is a cliffhanger. And they now also produce them in bulk, so you get 15, 16 shows at a time. And each one happens to just close at the moment when it's getting most interesting. And you say, okay, I'll watch 5 more minutes of it to see what really happened. And then you can't stop. So the entire deck is rigged against us because the entire industry, everywhere there's technology, they're using it to keep us addicted. So United Nations, maybe they should pass a law against this. And a charter saying addiction of all forms is bad, and we need to now stem technology addiction. But again, getting back to what this book is about, my belief is that the way to deal with it is to understand it. So we tried to do in the book was to make it very simple so you can understand exactly what's going on. As with any addiction, Alcoholics Anonymous, step one is you admit that you're addicted. You realize that something is wrong here. Step two is you understand the cause of the addiction. Step three is you work to mitigate it. Right? This is what we tried to show you in the book. First of all, just what exactly is going on here. What is this game that the tech industry is playing? And my hope is that the tech industry people don't learn new tricks from it. That's not what this was about. We're sharing their magic tricks with you. But the idea isn't that you use them in a bad way. The idea is that you understand them and you use them in a wise way to live happier lives. That's what this is all about.
And there probably is a lot of room for innovation to create business models and just uses that are a little healthier for us. To go to the internet game situation that we're talking about, I mean, are we going to ban video games for children? No, that's insane. I mean, my son plays Fortnite, God help me, but he's good. He plays 20 minutes a day. He doesn't scream when we tell him to turn it off. It's just like an adult having a beer after work. It's not something.
So you have boundaries on it.
You have boundaries.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think that there should be some sort of regulation or structures that help parents be aware, something that makes it possible for us to watch what's happening with the children and understand it better. We don't let kids walk around unattended in casinos. So I mean, I think it's not quite like that, but it's also not that far off. You could drop $200 a month in Fortnite buying skins or power packs. No problem. We know kids that do.
Right. And talk about how technology can be used for social good. How can we design technology to encourage it to be used for a social good rather than a social bad?
That's the case with every tool that you use. That you have to start thinking about what are my goals over here? Am I just trying to increase the revenue my company makes, or am I trying to now make it helpful to people? So you have to make that a part of your design. When you're looking at any technology, if you're building an app, take the dating apps, Tinder. Tinder is designed deliberately to keep you addicted. I mean, if you think about it, if you're designing Tinder from scratch, a dating app, once someone has found a date and if marriage works out for them, you've lost your customer. Right. So what do? They make the whole system geared towards short-term hookups. And they use the word hookups all over the place. It's about hookups. They want you to get laid and then find another partner the next day. That's what the entire system is based on. So the designers of it must have thought about this. I mean, I'm sure with a bunch of really bright kids working there whose goal was how do we keep them coming back, but they didn't think about the fact that we're going to be screwing up people's relationships. We're going to be changing the nature of society itself if we have such a transactional nature. This company that was it Facebook that's buying it was announced today. Hitch, I think it was called.
Yes, Hitch.
Hitch is a better implementation of Tinder. That they're trying to foster long-term relationships. But all of these technologies, they have in it the chat functionality. They have in it every technique in the book to keep you coming back for more.
My question is, how do we incentivize the social good leverage of tech?
It's really us who have to be aware of it.
So it's self-conscious.
When I say us, this is Silicon Valley, right? We're part of this ecosystem. We have to be cognizant of what we're creating here. We have to be cognizant about the dark side of our creations. We have to take responsibility. Facebook's employees are responsible for the genocide happening in Burma right now. They have to be aware of that. Now they can't be sued for it. They can't be go to jail for it. But they have to realize that they have a moral responsibility here to make sure that they speak up within their own companies. If they don't speak up, who will? Zuckerberg is in his little ivory shell. He doesn't get any critical input from anyone. He's surrounded by yes men and yes women. No one tells him really what's going on here. So if you folks don't do it, who is going to do it? So look at what happened at Google recently when employees started protesting about using AI for killing people. Look at what happened with Microsoft. Suddenly, the employees started protesting about
contracts with ICE.
Contracts with the immigration department when children were being caged up, right? So in 2 cases recently, tech employees spoke up and they had an impact. That needs to happen with social media because there are people in this room who are developing these technologies. You have to realize your responsibility. If you won't, who will? No one's going to wake up your CEOs. It's only you by coming together, speaking to your colleagues about it, having discussions within your own companies, and realizing the fact you're complicit in it. That if your technology is used for evil, it is negative karma for you. It's really a blot on your soul if you don't take responsibility for it. Have that responsibility and educate everyone around you, inspire them to do good. And that's the way we uplift humanity.
So I want to wrap up our portion here before I open it up to your questions. Looking forward to hearing your questions. But I have one more question for both of you. I'd like both your perspectives on where we may be in 5 years. And you could answer, dystopian, utopian. Give me best case scenario, worst case scenario, just briefly. What could happen and how?
The eyeglasses a lot of you folks are wearing, they're going to be covered with nanomaterials which are going to turn dark and take you into holographic worlds. Virtual reality today is big and bulky. It's going to be embedded in our contact lenses and our glasses, and we're going to be in virtual worlds. We're going to be learning, we're going to be interacting, we're going to be doing meetings such as this in virtual worlds in the next 5 to 7 years. So now, forget about trying to get us addicted to our smartphones. Zuckerberg is going to have the ability to turn us on and turn us off at will. And then next step, 10 years, 15 years from now, we're going to have little nanobots, USB devices in our brains which connect us to technology. That's what our friends in Silicon Valley are working on, is these types of technologies. So now we've become one with technology. If in the meantime, we don't figure out how to use technology for good, we're going to be in the dystopia of some of these movies that we saw. I can rattle off name after name after name of these movies.
The Circle, for example.
There are zillions of them. Most science fiction movies tend to be dark. Gone are the days when you had Star Trek, when we were going to uplift humanity and everything was going to be wonderful. We haven't had a feel-good TV series since Star Trek. Because what happens with technology is that it can be used for evil too easily. And it's always this dark dystopian path. That is where we're going to be unless we wake up. It's really up to us to figure this out.
Okay, Alex, can you give us some optimism here to finish up? No pressure.
About every 10 years, there's something that really disrupts Silicon Valley or technology and changes the paradigm of the way we interact with technology. Google, it's a little longer. It came in 2001, so every 15 or 20 years. I think we're overdue. I think we're already seeing signs of fatigue with current technology. Facebook usage is plummeting among younger people. When I see things like ads on Snapchat and I ask my son, he says, yeah, they really suck. So I think that the younger generation, people are savvy. They get what's happening. And I think they're starting to behave differently in ways that will make it harder for some of these old ways of doing business to continue. Or even if they do continue, it'll be on a lesser scale. I think some of the things that Vivek is talking about could come to pass and be really dangerous if people were not able to understand what was happening. But I think part of the good things of coming out of all the stuff that we're seeing in social media now is I think people are more aware. I think they're a little more wary and cautious. And I think they now understand to a greater degree, and especially people in Silicon Valley, that when you signed up on the internet and started posting drunk pictures from college, that it's not like they go away. That if you do it in technology, it's real. I think it took us quite a while to learn that, but I think people have learned that, and the kids are native.
Yes, Facebook's usage numbers haven't dropped at all, despite all the outcry we've had over the last few months.
So among kids, it's totally dropping. It's dropping.
The overall usage numbers are up. They're not down.
Yes, though I'm not entirely sure.
We're a bunch of idiots, all of us.
Well, I think to round that up, I think the future is in the hands of the millennials. So we're counting on you guys to be more savvy than perhaps our generation. So I'd like to open this up.
By the way, I want to put a plug in. We have 2 books outside. The first one is called Driving the Driverless Car. That book discusses the choices we must make. It covers all the basic technologies, everything from AI, robotics, virtual reality, networks, sensors, all of these things. And it talks about the choices we must make to build this amazing future of Star Trek versus Mad Max. So the book we're talking about, the second book, Your Happiness Was Hacked, gets into specifically how technology is hijacking our happiness. But they're both different perspectives, and I'd encourage you to read both of them, or go online and listen to the audiobooks if you want to. But they'll open your minds as to what's possible, because I'll bet you what Alex said about the people in this room understanding it is false. You folks don't understand how technology is advancing or what it's doing with it. Well, I give talks all over the world. What I find is that people in Silicon Valley are the most clueless of the people I talk about in the world. When I go to Korea, the Koreans are in Korea, in Industrial Revolution 4, IR4 is a household name. I'll bet you almost no one in this room knows what IR4 is, because we don't understand the impact of our technologies. We know a lot about social media. We'll know a lot about some coding techniques. We'll know a lot about our narrow fields. We don't see the forest for the trees, most of all in Silicon Valley. So the people here are less cued in to the bigger picture and to the impact of the technologies than people all over the world are.
Well, I'd love to hear from the audience. We have Mark and Willis who have mics. So if you have a question, please put your hand up, and Mark or Willis will come and hand you the mic.
Hi, my name is Brian Wong with Next Big Future. Very interesting talk. So I was thinking that you talked about Facebook versus companies either being regulated or doing more control. The regulation seems like too heavy-handed, blunt, and behind the curve and that kind of thing, that you wouldn't be able to, when Zuckerberg went and gave his talk, that clearly the people in Congress and stuff talking to them were clueless. So it seems that you would have to have, and for all the other small companies, they may be too small, like a 2-3 person make an app or like that. So you need to have, I think, programmatic modules created by other parties, and the regulation might be just that they have to interface with them. So you could more easily put in the dashboard that you're talking about, where you could put a dashboard onto Facebook and other things, and also make it where...
Look, here's the way the system works.
Yeah.
Laws are codified ethics. Ethics are a consensus that builds over time. It has to start with communities deciding what's right, what's wrong. Now, in this case, when we're talking about these advancing technologies, people don't know what to do with them. They don't know what they are. They don't even know what's happening. Therefore, what has to happen is the Silicon Valley has to start by coming together, pooling its knowledge, and then deciding on what it thinks the regulations should be, and then we debate them with the larger public. That's the way it needs to be, because we know this stuff better than anyone else does, at least our narrow slivers of these technologies.
Next question.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. I think it's really encouraging that we're having this type of dialogue. I was wondering if you've seen any...
Can you start with your name? And
Sure. Yes, my name is Michael. I work at one of these tech companies that people are complaining about.
Cool.
I was wondering if you've seen any guiding organizations that are really leading this thought of designing technology in responsible ways, like Tristan Harris or Yaron Lanier, Microsoft, that kind of thing.
There are a few narrow slivers like, Tristan Harris and company, but they're focused narrowly on it. And, you have a few other luminaries who are talking about it. The problem is there's no one looking at the big picture, because people don't even understand these things are happening. For example, one of the things that really worries me is about the impact of AI and robotics on jobs. Right? Here in Silicon Valley, we have this common mantra saying that we'll have universal basic income, and that'll take care of everything. In other words, we'll give everyone free money, not we. The government will give everyone free money and solve the problems we're creating. The fact is that basic income is just a Band-Aid. There's a much bigger, deeper problem. In the next 5 or 10 years, Uber and the self-driving car companies, including our friends at Ford and Mercedes-Benz, are going to be rolling out self-driving cars. Those cars are going to cause millions of jobs to disappear. Volvo is going to be rolling out self-driving trucks even sooner than that. They're going to cause millions of jobs to disappear. These people who lost their jobs, what are they going to do? They're going to be in despair. Who's worrying about this? Really, no one is. Right? So this is the type of problem we have, that the impact of technologies is imminent. Yet we don't have the groups coming together. This is why when I speak in Silicon Valley, I keep saying, guys, get together, gals, get together, think about it, talk about it. Let's come to a consensus amongst ourselves and then start teaching more broadly. Now, ironically, I used to be at Stanford Law School. When it came to this discussion, I decided to go to Harvard Law School. So I just joined Harvard Law School. I'm going to be working with world-renowned economist Richard Freeman in researching this thing. Why not Stanford? Why did I pick Harvard over Stanford? Because my colleagues at Stanford are equally clueless. They drink the Kool-Aid over here, and everything will be okay. We live in such an optimistic part of the world where we have our own filter bubbles, and Silicon Valley is one giant filter bubble. So I had to get outside the valley to get this research done, and that was in Boston.
Actually, I mean, I do. Maybe it's a little simpler, but it's actually super simple, and it's almost golden rule. Whenever an engineer asks me that, I say, step out of your normal job, stop thinking about how many people are using my product, how much revenue this will drive, and start thinking, is this something I would want someone to have my children doing, or my wife, or my friends? And it's a pretty simple filter, but for example, if you're Google and you're telling this to your mother, you're saying, well, by the way, Android is scooping up all of your payment information. It's totally cool. It's awesome. Everybody should want this. No, it doesn't make any sense. So apply this very simple filter of, would you do this to your friends? Do you think this is a good thing? And I think that would actually stop a lot of the behaviors we see.
Can you elaborate on what Tristan Harris, has everyone heard of Tristan Harris?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you expand on what you should watch his TED Talk. You should Google him and watch he's got a couple of TED Talks. And he's been described by the Atlantic magazine as the conscience of Silicon Valley. So he's definitely one to watch, and he's trying to move this ball forward.
Social media, but that's a small slice of it. It's much, much, much bigger than social media.
Well, he talks a bit about application design, too, which is... So, I mean, for example, when you give someone a menu, you're narrowing down their choices. The question is, what's not on the menu? So when you're designing a menu in an application, think through this. Am I designing this so with the best interest of the person in mind, or am I designing this in the best interest of my company? Also, the amount of time that people are spending on the applications. Is it good am I maximizing their path through the application for my benefit or for them to do what they need to do? So, for example, the example he often gives is in Facebook. If you want to get to the events page, you have to go through the news feed and something else. So they're trying to drive you through as many things as possible. It's almost like the pop-up windows. Anything that's kind of annoying and obnoxious and gets in your way should be done differently. Now, granted, that may shake up the revenue models, but it's just common sense and it's just common decency.
Develop better revenue models.
Yeah.
There are lots of models out there for revenue.
Or sell really expensive stuff like Apple.
Next question.
Hey, thanks, guys. Jeremiah. I think business models is kind of going to be the core of this because these companies are already public. I've been noticing that Facebook in the marketplace is now selling new products. I just noticed that this week. So that is a potential shift. Could they compete with Amazon?
It's a huge shift. It's one of their big focuses is moving into commerce.
Right. Yeah. So I think that is an opportunity, but I suspect we'll definitely see ads there. So the more we restrict ads, the more advertisers will pay. It's pure economics. So that's not going away. I also want to go back to the so I'm kind of making a point and also want to hear your reactions. Vivek, you talked about the premium model. While I do think that makes sense, that also puts us in extreme danger for elitism. Imagining people in Africa and Asia, South America, who are not going to be able to afford that, you're going to have a class society even further. And that could damage things even more. And
so
the last one
is...
we talked about that.
Alex wrote an article for Fortune. He wanted me to co-author it with him. I didn't co-author it because of that exact issue. I would not endorse that point of view. That I worry about that elitism and giving it to the haves, so that we have a walled garden. We don't get the ads, yet the majority of the people do get the ads. That's not fair either.
And my response to that also is that if Facebook decided to give the service to essentially all of the world that can't afford it, tiny drop in the bucket. They can afford it.
I agree.
That is not elitist.
Probably went to Facebook.
Yeah,
I get that feeling, so you can see it. The last thing is, if we do limit and restrict ads, and you see this happening in Instagram, what happens is you see influencer marketing and content marketing where people are pitching things constantly. Mm-hmm. So marketing and advertising isn't going away, but I do agree with you that the data control is a key thing. So just a few points and thoughts. But the last thing is...
Well, the marketing and advertising isn't going away. To address that super quickly. We're not saying it has to go away. We're saying ask us. If I want to pay for a clean Instagram feed with no ads, give me that choice. Don't force me to consume
those ads.
And tell us who's buying
the ads. So if the Russians now buying ads to influence us, we want to know about it.
Yeah, we agree wholeheartedly. The there's a point you guys said, what's the future? She was pinning you guys on that. What's the good thing out of this? And you guys didn't mention it really, but there's been a tremendous amount of wellness apps that have sprung up. In fact, Calm today received, I think, quite a few more millions
and
today.
Headspace before it.
And Headspace, and
That's right.
there's an app called Onward that limits the amount of time. So there's the fitness apps, and so I'm tracking this space professionally, and there's a lot of good apps that are going to emerge that can help all of us.
Well, and nowhere do we say that tech is all bad. I think Vivek will agree with that.
For sure. I hear the balance points.
Yeah. So we want more of the good, is what the bottom line is.
Yeah, I have no problem with Calm, or Headspace. I mean, they're great.
Until they start advertising and subliminal messages in the middle of your meditation, which might be their business model.
Have you seen Onward?
No, I have Headspace, and I use it, actually.
Onward does those things you're saying. They track the amount of time you use per day and sets limits. It should be in your...
Yeah, there's a bunch of apps that do things like that. I mean, we use Moment for my kids. So, and Apple's controls on iOS 12 are going to come and help you do that. You can also, Xfinity on their app will let you shut off people's devices. So there's lots of ways that companies are building to control it, but it's still not the norm. Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Who's got the mic? Whoever has the mic, go.
Hi, I'm Anirudh. I'm from Ford. And I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here.
Please.
So, to your comment that you said that, technology is increasing to such a point that people might be out of jobs. It's like saying, let's not stop having wars because military people would be out of jobs. So I feel like that's a little too far-fetched to say that technology will put a lot of people out of jobs,
but
because
if you're
there are
going to
better
shut down
things.
the military, you have to worry about what happens to the soldiers, right? So you need policies now. You need to have retraining. You need to now have methods for assimilating back in that. Otherwise, what do you get? You get guerrilla movements. Look at what's happened wherever militaries have been disbanded. Look at what happened in Iraq when you disbanded that military. It's the same thing with jobs. That yes, jobs are going to disappear, and we don't want those old line factory jobs or even the driving jobs. But what do you do with the people? You have to have policy to deal with the carnage that you're creating.
And I definitely agree that the policy will increase. But I strongly disagree in the way you hold the platforms responsible for technology addiction, because I feel like technology use is a human choice, and humans seek to have better, more comfortable, and faster lives.
That would be correct if it wasn't a great system. Right now we're using the most advanced AI technologies, the most advanced profiling technologies, the most sophisticated psychological techniques. Before, if you go back to the war and so on, the brainwashing techniques they used are baby stuff compared to what the kids in Silicon Valley are creating and putting into their apps using AI. So the trouble is it's not a level playing field.
Flavor tobacco. Tobacco companies aren't liable.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing, because addictions have been there since ages, and there have been addictions about so many different substances and many other things, and technology addiction is something new that's come up. But I feel like I myself personally haven't watched TV since the last 10 years because I chose not to do so. I chose not to attend to the ads that I see on Facebook, although I am using it.
Delta
I'm using
Airlines
Facebook
won't let you check into a flight without doing it online. So we're rapidly losing the ability to interact in a world without technology. I understand what you're saying. I haven't had a TV for 30 years either, but I don't think it's a choice anymore. At least not with TVs, but with lots of the other things.
I bet you're watching shows, YouTube videos on your laptop. That's cheating. That's the same as a TV. You don't watch Bollywood movies at all? I mean...
I know it's a distraction for me, so I choose not to.
Really? Wow.
Good for you. But actually, to that point, really quickly. So, I mean, yes, but could you make a choice not to use email at work?
So that's the other thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
Like the way you mentioned that Slack and other applications are distractive. Again, if you look at, from my perspective, if you look at the overall workload and work productivity, I don't think it's reduced the productivity, because if we didn't have emails, we would have to run around for an hour to catch people and inform them.
Correct.
But instead, I would just send a message and they can, in their convenience, they can look at the message and basically communicate whenever they have time.
Email itself isn't bad, you're right. But the average American checks
understand
email
that notifications are a distraction, but I don't see technology, I cannot see it being blamed for addiction, if that makes sense.
If everyone had the willpower that you do, we wouldn't have a problem here.
Okay,
We're
next
not like you, that's a
question.
problem.
Back there.
Hi, Navdeep, with designer at SAP. Really enjoying the conversation. So I asked someone from Siri, the Apple product, and why Siri is not as smart as Google Home. So big Google Assistant fanboy. And they told me that's because Apple chose not to abuse your data. And which is awesome. And on the other side, Google has the largest voice database, or like voice samples out there, and they're using everything they can in trying to make a smart system. So they have a smart system and Apple is not. That is because they try and protect our data. What are your thoughts on whether we want to use data for a smarter world, or not choose to share data and have not so meaningful?
I think that's the excuse that the developers made for having such a shitty product.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that's a false choice, because you are seeing a lot more of the machine learning stuff coming out that can learn on smaller data sets. And that's you see it across the board, and it's just going to get easier and easier. Google's advantage there is not really that big a deal.
Right. No, I mean, not just with voice, but also with
everything.
With ads, it's the same thing. They use your data. Do you want to see things that are relevant, or do you just want to see something really stupid because the system is not able to? If you're not giving enough data to any system, machine learning can't understand, or like it can't
Apple
target
has
anything.
more data than it could possibly need for this, and it's had it longer than Google has. They just haven't been innovating correctly. The internal problems with the way Apple has been organized and structured, and the way they've been doing R&D, and also they rely too much on the technology they bought from SRI to build Siri with. Right. So there are many other reasons over here.
But related to that as well, I mean, I think this is something where I agree with Vivek almost completely on. Silicon Valley has kind of sold us this bill of goods that we need all your data to make these decisions. When in reality, they probably only need a small slice of data, or maybe they can put us in an anonymous cohort, or maybe just by looking at our local browsing history without ever pushing it back up into the cloud, which is actually something Mozilla is doing, they can serve the right ads. So there's lots of ways to achieve the same things that they say they need all our data to do. They just don't want to do it because it's more work and it's not convenient.
Next question.
Hey, this is Mihai. I'm probably also one of the causes, right, where you're talking about, and you're kind of blaming so many companies of not doing the right thing.
But not the people. Well,
okay.
Yeah.
But then don't you think also education is an issue with this, right? So, I mean, yeah, we're very optimistic. We're in Silicon Valley. Life is great. It's always sunny. So many great things to do around here. So, of course, we don't see the bad things that we can also create. We only see the good things, right? But then, like, a lot of people also don't understand how can they use
that's what I was saying earlier on, that the people I meet in Silicon Valley are the most clueless, because they think that they're very smart, and they are actually very smart, except they're very smart in their narrow niches, and then they hang around with people who are just like them, and it's a group think. So they don't see the big picture. You're right, we have to educate them.
And to that point, too, I mean, I think the education is not just people in Silicon Valley. Yes, we need to teach them, but also our children. So, for example, my kids, when they first went on, they signed up on some social networks. They didn't understand what was happening. And we had tried to teach them a little bit about it. But realistically, we should have spent more time teaching them. And their school, which put them on the iPad, should have taught them. So right now, there's very little education or effort by parents or schools or anything else to help the younger generation understand what it is they're really getting into.
Okay, so one more point to that. So you talked about government regulation, right? Mm-hmm. But the issue with government regulation is that they stop innovation.
No, not necessarily. DARPA?
Now, also, what happens when you have regulations, it's like laying down the tracks.
No, but
and then everyone knows what the rules are, and they work within the rules. It's when you have no regulations whatsoever, companies don't know what they should and shouldn't do, and therefore you have disorder. Yeah. Smart regulations can be productive.
Okay, so we have time for just 2 more questions.
Oh, no, Andrew.
Oh, the pressure's on. Andrew, I'm a social media marketer and a bit of an addict, although I was capturing your brilliant tweets for my own benefit. So we talked about, one development in that we're gaining awareness of how much we use certain apps to iOS 12 to, and I think this audience too, in Silicon Valley you have a lot of builders. So what can these people do here next with that data? What are some of the next apps and how are they going to help us? Regulation is one thing, but how can we build things that are going to make us smarter and better?
Andrew, first you have to realize that there's a problem, as I said. So this is what we try to do with the book, is to show you exactly what's going on. And then you have to start brainstorming with everyone else. I mean, there are a lot of brilliant people over here. Start discussing the problem. Start thinking about the dark side of your technology. Be aware that every technology can be used for good and evil. It goes back to the first technology, fire. Fire could be used to keep us warm or to burn down homes. It's the same thing with everything we're doing. Here, we've had this group think that we can only do good. There's no evil. Like I said, the Google example of we're not evil, we won't be evil, whatever. The fact is that Google is equally evil as anyone else is. So start realizing that there's a dark side to it and start keeping that in mind every time you design a feature or a function or you have a meeting. All of us have a responsibility here to start being that voice of reason.
And just to add to this, which I think is very complementary to what Vivek is saying, these should be conscious discussions, conscious decisions, instead of, oh, this is this thing, we'll try it, we'll use it, here it is, do this or that. There's lots of ways that we can surface this and make it something that we're aware of, that it's an actual conscious decision with true agency instead of something that creeps up on us.
Great. Time for just one last question.
Hi, my name is Barry, and like many of us, I do work here in Silicon Valley, but my question is actually coming from a user point of view. I'm a father of 2 young boys at home, and I'm concerned about their use of technology. And so you talked into, and I believe in the idea that for some people it becomes a very unhealthy addiction in the same way that some mental addiction and substance abuse addiction and so forth. So my question is, are there now any organizations or so forth that actually help people recover from or deal with these types of addictions, in the sense that there's AA and other programs for?
Sounds like a good business opportunity. Your next startup. But ironically, Steve Jobs didn't let his children use the iPad. A lot of the tech gurus don't let their children use technology.
Nir Eyal, who wrote Hooked, actually limits his kids' technology quite a bit. But I think there's nothing quite like an Alcoholics Anonymous. I think those kinds of things will emerge, but there certainly are therapists that specialize in treating this and can help people.
I think it's probably worth looking at the website Time Well Spent.
Yes.
That's Tristan Harris's website, and there might be some good tips in there for parents and for business people, consumers, etc. And as I say, look at his TED Talk, perhaps with your kids, so that they as Vivek, as we're all kind of emphasizing, understanding how we're getting addicted is part of the journey to getting free from it. So I'd like to thank Vivek and Alex for sharing your wisdom tonight. And I'd like to thank all of you for your insightful questions and observations. I'm hoping tonight's conversation will help inspire you to forge a more mindful relationship with technology. Let's leverage its full potential for ourselves, for our relationships, for our communities, for our businesses, and for democracy. And let's be conscious and not fall into this seduction of mindless time wasting. Going back to our Nobel Prize winner for economics, remember, time is our ultimate scarcity. And with that in the back of your head, you can be more mindful about your use of tech. Thank you so much. And count.
Thank you very much.
Karen, thank you for being such a great host.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your views so candidly, Alison, for leading the conversation so very well. We have for you, as a small token of our appreciation, a non-tech T-shirt.
All right.
You won't have to put that away.
Thank you.
It won't harm anything.
Awesome.
And I wanted to mention that Vivek and Alex have some slides on this topic, as well as some end notes that they would be willing to share with you if you are interested. So the way that you can get them is simply take out your card and write the word yes on it, give it to one of the Churchill folks before you leave, or write down your contact information, and we'll make sure that we get that over to Vivek and Alex, and they can send you their materials. And as a convenience for you, copies of the book are available here for purchase, and the speakers have graciously agreed to stay around and personalize it if you would like them to do that for you. We invite you to join us for our next public program, which will be next week, the 28th of June, up at the amazing Autodesk Gallery. And the title of that is The New World of Work, The Unraveling of Scale. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time.